Eleanor Hayes woke at 6:30 on a Saturday morning in her modest downtown apartment. At 67, she still preferred the rhythm of early rising, a habit formed during the years when she'd juggled 3 jobs to keep her son Brandon fed, clothed, and in a decent school district. The apartment was small, just 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a living room barely large enough for a couch and reading chair. The building was old, the water pressure questionable, the radiator clanged through winter nights. But it was paid for, it was clean, and it was hers. She moved to the window, looking out at the city waking below. Somewhere out there, 42 floors up in a glass tower, was her real office. The corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows and a mahogany desk the size of a small car. But she didn't think about that as she made her morning coffee. This morning was about family. On her kitchen table sat a carefully wrapped package, a hand-knitted scarf in blue and gray stripes. She'd spent 3 weeks working on it, her fingers cramping around the needles, but it was worth it. Oliver, her grandson, had mentioned liking those colors. Today was his 6th birthday. Her phone rang. Brandon's name appeared on the screen. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Hi, Mom." His voice carried that particular strain she'd learned to recognize over the past 3 years. The sound of a man walking on eggshells in his own home. "Just wanted to confirm, you're still coming today? 3 o'clock? Of course, I have Oliver's present ready." A pause, muffled voices in the background. Then, "Great, that's great. See you then." He hung up quickly. Eleanor stared at the phone, knowing without being told that Victoria had been in the room, monitoring the conversation. Victoria Ashford Hayes, her daughter-in-law, a woman who'd made it abundantly clear, in 1,000 subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that Eleanor was an embarrassment to be managed, rather than a grandmother to be loved. Eleanor sighed and went to choose her outfit for the party. She selected her nicest dress, simple black, knee-length, with a modest neckline. She'd bought it on sale at Macy's 2 years ago for $60. It was clean, pressed, appropriate. But as she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw what Victoria would see. Cheap fabric, outdated cut, the dress of a woman who shopped clearance racks. Well, there was nothing to be done about that. Eleanor took the bus to Westchester, watching the neighborhoods transform from urban density to suburban sprawl to the manicured estates of the truly wealthy. Brandon's house, Victoria's house really, since she'd chosen it, decorated it, filled it with friends who matched the aesthetic, sat at the end of a cul-de-sac like a crown jewel. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a 3-car garage. The yearly property taxes were more than Eleanor's rent. She could have bought them 10 houses like this. She chose not to mention that. The driveway was already crowded with expensive cars. Mercedes, BMW, a Tesla, a Range Rover. Eleanor recognized some of them from her own company parking garage, though the owners didn't know that. She rang the doorbell at exactly 3 o'clock. Victoria answered. She was dressed in what Eleanor's practiced eye recognized as a designer outfit, probably $1,200 for the ensemble. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless, her smile sharp as cut glass. "Oh, Eleanor." Victoria's eyes traveled from Eleanor's sensible flats to her Macy's dress to her silver hair, simply pulled back with a clip. "You're here. Not Mom, not Mother Eleanor, just Eleanor." "Hello, Victoria. I brought something for Oliver." Victoria's gaze dropped to the wrapped package in Eleanor's hands, homemade wrapping paper, a yarn bow. "How homemade. Sweet." The word dripped with condescension. "Well, come in, I suppose. The other guests are already here." The house was filled with people who belonged in glossy magazines. Women in Chanel and St. John, men in country club casual, everyone holding champagne flutes and talking in the hushed, self-important tones of the wealthy. "Grandma!" Oliver's voice cut through the adult chatter like sunshine breaking clouds. He ran toward her, his little arms outstretched, face glowing with genuine joy. Eleanor's heart swelled. She knelt down to catch him in a hug. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." "I'm 6 now. That's this many." He held up 6 fingers, beaming. "So grown up. I made you something special." Victoria's hand landed on Oliver's shoulder, pulling him back. "Oliver, honey, remember what we talked about? Grandma needs to wash her hands first. You know the rules." The message was clear. Eleanor was dirty, contaminated, not clean enough to touch her own grandson. Oliver's face fell, but he was well trained. "Okay, Mommy." Eleanor straightened slowly, her knees protesting. "The bathroom?" Down the hall, second door. Victoria had already turned away, Oliver in tow, rejoining her guests. Eleanor washed her hands in a bathroom larger than her kitchen, using soap that probably cost $40 a bottle. She stared at herself in the ornate mirror, seeing a woman who'd once been told she'd never amount to anything. A woman who'd proven everyone wrong. But Victoria didn't know that, and that was by design. Dinner was an exercise in humiliation. The dining table stretched the length of the room, set with china that gleamed under a crystal chandelier. 22 people took their seats. Business executives, socialites, a local politician, Victoria's tennis friends. Eleanor was seated at the far end, nearest the kitchen door. The placement was deliberate. The seat farthest from the seat of honor, where Oliver sat between his parents. To her left was an empty chair. To her right, a man named Richard, who spent the entire appetizer course talking loudly about his recent acquisition of a tech startup, never once acknowledging Eleanor's existence. She ate quietly, watching Oliver from across the vast distance of linen and silverware. He kept looking at her, trying to catch her eye, but Victoria redirected his attention each time. Halfway through the main course, a woman Eleanor didn't recognize spoke up. "So Eleanor, what do you do?" The table quieted slightly. Victoria's eyes sharpened. "I run a small business," Eleanor said carefully. "Oh? What kind of business?" Before Eleanor could respond, Victoria cut in with a laugh that sounded like ice in a glass. "Eleanor does administrative work, very humble. She's always been very grounded." The woman nodded politely, her interest already fading. Around the table, Eleanor saw the subtle shifts, people angling themselves slightly away from her, the unconscious recoil that happened when someone was deemed less important. She'd seen it before, many times, but never from her own family. "Actually," Eleanor began, "I work in the tech sector." "Oh, that reminds me," Victoria spoke over her, turning to a man 3 seats down. "Richard, you must tell everyone about that new AI company you invested in." Richard launched into another monologue. Eleanor's words evaporated into silence. She noticed something then. One of the servers, a woman perhaps 60 with kind eyes and efficient movements, was someone Eleanor recognized. Martha. She worked in TechVision's cafeteria, had been there for nearly 2 decades. The catering company must have contracted through Eleanor's own company. Martha didn't recognize her, of course. Few people at TechVision had ever seen their CEO's face. Eleanor preferred it that way, but she watched how Victoria treated the serving staff, how she snapped her fingers for refills, how she criticized the temperature of the soup loud enough for everyone to hear, how she made a show of moving her water glass an inch to the left after Martha had placed it, as if the older woman couldn't understand basic spatial reasoning. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "So Eleanor," a woman named Catherine spoke up during dessert, clearly trying to be kind. "Victoria mentioned you live downtown?" "I do. A small apartment near—" "Downtown?" Victoria laughed. "Can you imagine? When Brandon and I looked at properties, we knew we needed space. Room to grow, to entertain properly." She gestured at the opulent dining room. "You can't raise a child in some cramped apartment, can you?" Catherine looked uncomfortable. "Well, many people—" "It's about standards," Victoria continued, her voice carrying across the table. "About understanding your place in the world. Some people are comfortable with less. Others," she smiled, "recognize the importance of image." Eleanor set down her fork carefully. Around her, the conversation had died. Everyone was listening now. "Grandma!" Oliver had climbed down from his chair and was running toward her end of the table. "Grandma, will you tell me the Dragon Queen story?" It was their tradition. A story Eleanor had created about a queen who saved herself, who was clever and strong and didn't need rescuing. Oliver loved it. Eleanor's face softened. "Of course, sweetheart." "Oliver, stop!" Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. She was on her feet, face flushed with anger. "Get away from there right now." "But Mommy, I want Grandma to tell—" "I said now!" Oliver's face crumpled. He was 6 years old, confused, on the verge of tears. "But it's my birthday." Victoria crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Oliver's arm, yanking him away from Eleanor with enough force to make him stumble. The boy started crying. "Victoria, please," Eleanor said quietly, standing. "It's his birthday. He just wants—" "I know what he wants!" Victoria whirled on her. "And what I want is for you to stop undermining me in my own home." The room was frozen. 20 pairs of eyes watched in horrified silence. "I'm not undermining anyone," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Oliver asked for a story. You were simply making a spectacle of yourself. Again." Victoria's chest heaved. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? How embarrassing you are?" Brandon stood slowly. "Vicky, that's my mother." "Your mother," Victoria said, each word sharp as a knife, "doesn't belong at a table with decent people. Look at her, Brandon. That dress probably cost $30. Her shoes are scuffed. She took the bus here. The bus." Eleanor felt her face burn, but she kept her expression neutral. "She's making us look like we came from nothing," Victoria continued. "Like we're charity cases who let anyone into our home." "Mom raised me," Brandon said weakly. "She's family." "Security!" There was no security, but Victoria pointed toward the door with theatrical fury. "Please escort this woman out. She's disrupting our family celebration." Eleanor looked at her son. Brandon's face was pale, his eyes fixed on his plate. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't defend her. 20 people watched an old woman being thrown out of her grandson's birthday party. Oliver was sobbing. "Grandma, don't go. Please don't go." Eleanor walked to him, ignoring Victoria's sharp intake of breath. She knelt down, her knees protesting, and gently touched his cheek. "It's all right, sweetheart. Grandma has to leave now, but I love you. Always remember that. But your present, you'll get it another time." She stood, every movement dignified despite the humiliation coursing through her veins. She looked at Victoria. "Thank you for the dinner. Very enlightening." Then she walked out, her head high, leaving her grandson crying and her son silent. The door closed behind her with a definitive click. Eleanor sat in her car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. She stared at the steering wheel, at her reflection in the rearview mirror. 67 years old, silver hair mussed from Oliver's hug, wearing a dress that Victoria had mocked. She looked like exactly what Victoria had called her, a poor old woman who didn't know her place. But what Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Monday morning, Eleanor would walk into the gleaming headquarters of Tech Vision Industries, take the elevator to the 42nd floor, and sit behind the mahogany desk in the corner office. The same company where Victoria worked as a marketing manager, pulling down $280,000 a year. The same company Eleanor had founded 40 years ago in a garage, when Brandon was 2 years old and she had nothing but a second-hand computer and the absolute refusal to fail. Victoria had wanted to teach Eleanor about knowing her place. Monday morning, Eleanor would teach Victoria about consequences. She pulled out her phone and dialed Dorothy Miller, her executive assistant of 18 years. "Dorothy, I need you in early Monday, 6 in the morning. Pull all personnel files for the marketing division. Everything. Performance reviews, colleague feedback, any complaints filed in the past 2 years." "Everything all right, boss?" Eleanor started the engine. "Not yet, but it will be." Monday morning arrived cold and dark. Eleanor entered Tech Vision's headquarters at 5:45, her heels clicking on marble floors. The security guard, Miguel, looked surprised. "Mrs. Hayes, you're here early." "Couldn't sleep, Miguel. Big week ahead." She took the private elevator to 42, emerging into the executive suite. The lights activated automatically as she walked down the hall, past offices that bore the names of people who reported to her, who made critical decisions, who thought they understood power. Her office door bore a brass nameplate, Eleanor Hayes, founder and chief executive officer. Inside, the city was still mostly dark, just the first hints of dawn touching the skyline. Eleanor had watched that view change for 4 decades, had built something from nothing while this city slept and woke and went about its business. She sat at her desk and opened her computer. Dorothy arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying a thick folder and 2 cups of coffee. "Your file, boss, and you look like you need this." She set a coffee in front of Eleanor. "Thank you." Eleanor opened the folder. "Pull up a chair. We have work to do." Inside were 3 years of personnel records for Victoria Ashford Hayes. Hired 28 months ago, promoted twice. Excellent performance reviews from her direct supervisor. Salary, $280,000. But there were other documents too. Flagged items that had never made it to Eleanor's desk. 3 formal complaints. "Walk me through these," Eleanor said. Dorothy pulled out the first one. Grace Patterson, 61, senior accountant, 25 years with the company. Filed a complaint 8 months ago that Victoria publicly humiliated her during a budget meeting. Called her methods outdated and suggested she consider early retirement. Resolution? Dismissed by James Kim in HR. He classified it as generational communication differences. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened on the paper. Next one. Samuel Wright, 64, head of facilities, 12 years with us, former Marine. He reported that Victoria made him work overtime on her personal office renovation. Multiple instances of her calling him slow and saying he couldn't keep up with modern demands. And dismissed. James noted that Victoria is a high performer with high standards. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. The third? Rita Gonzalez, 58, cafeteria supervisor, 18 years of perfect reviews. Dorothy's voice tightened with anger. Victoria complained that Rita was unprofessional and couldn't follow simple instructions because Rita couldn't instantly reschedule cafeteria cleaning for a last-minute client meeting. Rita was transferred to the graveyard shift. Eleanor stood abruptly, moving to the window. The sun was rising now, painting the glass towers gold. Is Rita still on graveyard? Yes, ma'am. Transfer her back to days, effective immediately, with a raise. Eleanor turned. And I want to see James Kim in my office at 9 sharp. What about Victoria? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then, I want her transferred, today. To where? Eleanor thought about Rita, demoted for doing her job. About Grace, humiliated for experience. About Samuel, a man who'd served his country, treated like he was disposable. Cafeteria services, dishwashing station, minimum wage. Dorothy's eyes widened. Boss, that's quite a demotion. She'll file a grievance, maybe sue. Let her. Tell her it's a new cross-training initiative. Management learning all aspects of operations. Eleanor's smile was cold. And Dorothy, I don't want this escalated to me yet. Process it through James. I want to see how he handles it. And if he pushes back, then he'll be joining her in the dishwashing station. At exactly 9 o'clock, James Kim knocked on Eleanor's door. He was 28, ambitious, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been truly challenged. He'd been junior HR manager for 2 years, handling employee complaints with the primary goal of minimizing company liability. He'd never met the CEO before. Eleanor preferred it that way. Invisible authority, observing without being seen. Mr. Kim, sit down. He sat, smoothing his tie nervously. Mrs. Hayes, it's an honor to finally... Tell me about these. Eleanor turned her monitor toward him. 3 complaint files filled the screen. James's confident expression faltered. Those were workplace disagreements. Standard HR management. Grace Patterson filed a complaint that Victoria Ashford Hayes publicly humiliated her, suggested she retire because her methods were outdated. You dismissed it as generational communication differences. Victoria is a high performer. Sometimes there's friction when different work styles. Samuel Wright reported that Victoria made him work unpaid overtime on personal projects, while making derogatory comments about his age and capabilities. You dismissed it because Victoria has high standards. James shifted in his seat. Mrs. Hayes, in context, Rita Gonzalez was transferred to graveyard shift after Victoria complained about her professionalism. Rita has 18 years of perfect reviews. Victoria has been here for 28 months. Eleanor leaned forward. Mr. Kim, do you see a pattern? I was trying to balance the needs of a high-performing executive with... You were protecting someone who was systematically harassing older employees. Eleanor's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 40 years of command. 3 complaints in 8 months, all dismissed without proper investigation, all targeting employees over 50. James went pale. I didn't realize... You didn't look. That's worse than not knowing. Eleanor pulled up another file. Victoria Ashford Hayes is being transferred today. Cafeteria services, dishwashing station. But that's a cross-training initiative. We're having management personnel learn all aspects of operations, starting with her. She'll sue for retaliation. For what? For being given the opportunity to understand how this company actually functions? Eleanor smiled without warmth. Process the paperwork, Mr. Kim. And going forward, every single harassment complaint comes directly to Dorothy Miller. Every single one. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Mrs. Hayes. Good. Now get out. After he left, Dorothy appeared in the doorway. Transfer processed. Victoria reports to Rita tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Perfect. Eleanor turned back to her window. Now we wait. Tuesday morning, 6 o'clock. The cafeteria level was a world away from the executive suites. Industrial kitchens, stainless steel surfaces, the smell of commercial-grade cleaning supplies. Victoria Ashford Hayes stood in the doorway wearing an expensive designer coat, her face a mixture of confusion and fury. Rita Gonzalez looked up from her clipboard. The older woman's expression was professionally neutral, but Eleanor knew from the personnel file she'd studied that Rita had worked here for 18 years, had been transferred to nights because Victoria found her inconvenient. "You must be the new transfer," Rita said. "Station 3, follow me." "There's been a mistake." Victoria's voice was sharp. "I'm VP of Marketing. I shouldn't be. According to my schedule, you're a dishwasher. Station 3. Rita pointed to a metal sink piled with dirty serving trays. Victoria pulled out her phone, checking the email from HR. Her face went from confused to furious to calculating in rapid succession. "I need to make a call. No personal calls during shift." Rita handed her a bundle. Plastic apron, hairnet, rubber gloves. "Lockers are there. Change and report in 5 minutes." Eleanor watched from the service corridor, dressed in a maintenance uniform she'd borrowed from facilities. At 67, with silver hair tucked under a baseball cap and reading glasses, she was invisible. Just another older woman cleaning floors. She'd learned this technique decades ago, the art of being overlooked. It was how she'd gathered competitive intelligence in TechVision's early days. And now it was how she would observe Victoria's true character. Eleanor mopped slowly, methodically, staying close enough to hear everything. Victoria emerged from the locker room looking like someone had stolen her identity. The hairnet mashed her styled hair flat. The apron hung awkwardly over her designer clothes. Her $200 manicure was about to be destroyed. At Station 3, Martha Cooper, the woman Eleanor had seen serving at Oliver's party, was already working with practiced efficiency. "First day?" Martha's smile was kind. "Don't worry, honey. It gets easier." "I won't be here long enough for it to get easier," Victoria muttered. Eleanor kept mopping, listening. The first hour was brutal. Victoria's hands turned red from the scalding water. Her manicure chipped within 20 minutes. The industrial dish soap had a chemical smell that made her eyes water. Martha worked beside her with steady rhythm, scraping plates, loading the commercial washer, never rushed but never slow. "You're scrubbing too hard," Martha said gently. "The machine does most of the work. You just need to get the big pieces." "I know how to wash dishes." Victoria's tone was harsh. Martha didn't respond, just kept working. By 11:30, the lunch rush hit. 500 employees eating meant 500 trays, plates, cups, all of it flowing through Victoria's station in an endless stream. Her back ached, her feet hurt, her hands were raw despite the gloves. Carlos Ruiz, a 60-year-old man with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd done physical labor his entire life, brought over another rack of dirty dishes. "Lunch rush always hits hard," he said cheerfully. "You'll build up stamina." "I won't be here long enough to build stamina." Carlos's smile dimmed slightly. "That's what we all say at first." "I'm not like you people," Victoria said under her breath. Eleanor, mopping 6 feet away, went very still. During the afternoon break, Victoria sat in the cramped break room, staring at her ruined hands. Linda Chen, a 55-year-old woman who worked the serving line, sat down across from her. "First day's always the hardest," Linda said, unwrapping a sandwich. "I have an MBA from Cornell." The words burst out of Victoria. "I was managing 7-figure marketing campaigns. This is insane." "Rita has a degree in hospitality management," Linda replied mildly. "Top of her class at Johnson & Wales. Martha raised 3 kids working 2 jobs. Carlos served 20 years in the Army before retiring here." Victoria stared at her. "Then why are they here? Washing dishes?" "Because they're good at it. Because it's honest work that matters." Linda took a bite of her sandwich. "We all have our reasons. Maybe you should ask about them before deciding we're failures." She got up and left. Eleanor continued mopping near the doorway, invisible and listening to everything. By Friday, Victoria was barely holding together. Her hands were bandaged. Her hair hung limp from cafeteria steam. The designer clothes she'd worn that first day had been replaced by cheap alternatives that could handle grease and chemicals. During the lunch break, Eleanor watched Victoria collapse at a break room table, phone pressed to her ear. "Brandon, you need to do something. This is illegal. They can't just..." Pause. "Stop telling me to finish the week. Do you know what this is doing to me?" Pause. "Your mother..." Victoria's voice dripped venom. "She's probably loving this. Sitting in that pathetic apartment, laughing at me. She's trash, Brandon. She raised you to accept mediocrity, and now her poison is infecting our family." Eleanor stood perfectly still in the corridor just outside the break room door. "I don't care if that sounds harsh, it's true. She's jealous of what we've built." Victoria's voice cracked. "She wants to drag us down to her level. She's an embarrassment, and the sooner you cut her out of Oliver's life completely, the better off we'll be." Eleanor walked away slowly, her decision hardening with every step. Victoria hadn't learned empathy. She'd learned resentment. That evening, Eleanor sat at her laptop in her small apartment. She shouldn't look at Brandon's emails. They were his private correspondence. But his account was routed through TechVision's server for his occasional marketing work, which made them technically accessible. She hesitated, then thought about Martha's tears, about Grace, humiliated, about Samuel, demeaned, about Rita, transferred to nights. She opened the email thread. From Victoria Ashford Hayes to Brandon Hayes. Subject: "Can't do this anymore." Date: Friday, 6:47 p.m. "Brandon, I can't do this anymore. These people are beneath me. Your mother raised you to accept poverty and mediocrity, but I won't let Oliver grow up thinking this is acceptable. I've been thinking about what we discussed 3 months ago. You said no then, but I'm asking again. We need to cut Eleanor out of Oliver's life completely. Every time he sees her, he asks why Grandma lives in a small apartment and why she doesn't have nice things like us. He's starting to question our lifestyle, wondering if success even matters. I know you think I'm being cruel, but I'm protecting our son from learning the wrong values. Eleanor is a weight around our necks. She embarrasses us in front of our peers. She makes us look like we came from nothing. Tomorrow I'm calling my lawyer about TechVision. Someone is targeting me, probably that incompetent HR woman. But I'm also done pretending with your mother. After this nightmare week is over, she's not welcome in our house anymore. You need to choose, your wife and son, or the woman who held you back your entire childhood. I'm sorry to frame it this way, but it's time for you to grow up and see her for what she really is." Eleanor read it 3 times. The part about cutting her out of Oliver's life didn't surprise her. She'd suspected as much. But seeing it in writing, seeing Victoria's cold calculation, made it real. The woman who held you back your entire childhood. Eleanor had worked 3 jobs to keep Brandon in a good school district, had coded in a garage at midnight while he slept in the next room, had built a $2 billion company so he'd never struggle the way she had. And this was how Victoria saw it, as something to be ashamed of. Eleanor closed the laptop. Monday morning, she would end this. Saturday morning, Eleanor called an emergency board meeting. The invitations went out through Dorothy, all C-suite executives, general counsel, and 1 additional attendee. Victoria Ashford Hayes, VP Marketing, currently on temporary assignment. Dorothy hesitated when she saw the list. "Boss, if Victoria sees you in that boardroom..." "That's exactly the point," Eleanor said quietly. "It's time." Monday, 10 o'clock. The executive boardroom on the 42nd floor. Victoria arrived in wrinkled clothes, hair still damp from a rushed shower, hands bandaged. She looked confused, exhausted, completely out of place among the powerful people assembled around the mahogany table. "Why am I here?" she asked the room at large. "I'm in the middle of a cafeteria shift." "Mrs. Hayes requested your presence," said Sarah Martinez, the new HR director Eleanor had hired just 2 weeks ago. "Mrs. Hayes? Who?" The door opened. Eleanor Hayes walked in wearing a navy Armani suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, radiating the authority of someone who'd commanded boardrooms for 40 years. Behind her, a screen flickered to life. TechVision Industries. Eleanor Hayes, founder and chief executive officer. Victoria's face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion melted into shock. Shock crystallized into horror. Horror fractured into desperate, scrambling calculation. "You..." Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. This can't be." Eleanor moved to the head of the table with the ease of someone who'd sat there 10,000 times. She set down a leather folder, pressed a button on the console, and looked directly at Victoria. "Please sit down, Miss Ashford Hayes. We have much to discuss." Victoria collapsed into the nearest chair, her face chalk white. Eleanor turned to the board. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have a serious situation regarding workplace culture and systematic age discrimination." The screen changed. Age discrimination complaints, Marketing Division, 2024 to 2025. Over the past 18 months, we've experienced a 300% increase in age-related harassment complaints, all from one division, all dismissed at the HR level without proper escalation. Slides appeared. Grace Patterson's complaint with email evidence. Samuel Wright's documentation of overtime violations. Rita Gonzalez's transfer to graveyard shift. Victoria tried to speak. "Mrs. Hayes?" "Eleanor, this is a misunderstanding." "Is it?" Eleanor's voice was ice. "Is it a misunderstanding that you called Grace Patterson outdated and suggested she retire?" "That was professional feedback." "Is it a misunderstanding that you made Samuel Wright work unpaid overtime while calling him slow and past his prime?" "I have high standards." "High standards." Eleanor pulled up an email, projecting it on the screen for everyone to see. "Is this your high standard? Quote, why do we keep these dinosaurs? They're taking up space younger talent deserves." End quote. The room went silent. Victoria's face crumbled. "That was taken out of context." "Context." Eleanor smiled without warmth. "Let's discuss context. I spent this past week working in the cafeteria as a maintenance worker. Helen Miller, perhaps you remember her?" Victoria's eyes went wide with horror. "I mopped floors next to your station. I cleaned while you made phone calls." Eleanor's voice was surgical in its precision. "I heard you tell Martha Cooper that she'd given up on life. I heard you tell Linda that cafeteria workers are beneath you. I heard you tell my son on the phone that I'm trash, who raised him to accept mediocrity." Around the table, board members shifted uncomfortably. "You were spying on me?" Victoria's voice rose in desperation. "I was investigating an employee with multiple harassment complaints to determine if those complaints had merit." Eleanor sat down, folding her hands. "They did. In fact, the reality was worse than the documentation suggested." David Foster, the general counsel, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes, with respect, having the CEO work undercover, exposes us to what, David? A lawsuit?" Eleanor turned to him. "Ms. Ashford Hayes is welcome to sue. I have documented evidence of systematic harassment spanning 18 months. I have witness testimonies from a dozen employees. I have her own words, many of which I personally witnessed, demonstrating a clear pattern of age discrimination." She turned back to Victoria. "You asked why you're in this meeting. You're here because what happens to you will set the precedent for how TechVision handles discrimination going forward." "This is about the party," Victoria burst out. "You're punishing me because I asked you to leave Oliver's birthday." "No." Eleanor's voice was quiet but cut through Victoria's desperation like a blade. "This is about Martha, who cried in the dish pit after you told her that 18 years of work didn't matter. This is about Grace, counting down to retirement because you made her workplace unbearable. This is about every person you dismissed, belittled, and destroyed because you thought your MBA made you better than them." Eleanor stood. "The party just showed me who you really are. The investigation showed me the damage you've done." Sarah Martinez opened a folder. "Ms. Ashford Hayes, you have two options. Option 1, immediate resignation with a neutral reference letter. You sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement. Option 2, you remain employed while we conduct a formal investigation. When the investigation confirms the harassment, which seems likely given the evidence, you'll be terminated for cause. No reference, no agreement, and the findings become part of your permanent record." Victoria looked around the table. Every face was professionally neutral, but their verdict was clear. "This is blackmail," she whispered. "This is accountability," Eleanor said. "That's more than you gave Grace, more than you gave Samuel, more than you gave Rita." The silence stretched. Victoria thought about fighting, about lawyers and lawsuits and making this ugly. But she looked at the evidence on screen, at her own emails, at Eleanor's face, calm, certain, absolutely unwilling to back down. "I resign." Sarah slid papers across the table. "Sign here, here, and here." Victoria signed with shaking, bandaged hands. "Security will escort you from the building," Sarah said. "Your personal belongings will be delivered to your home." Victoria stood on trembling legs. She looked at Eleanor one final time. "Brandon will never forgive you for this." "Then I'll lose my son," Eleanor said quietly. "But I'll keep my integrity. You're just a bitter old woman jealous of what I built with your son." "I built a $2 billion company from a garage," Eleanor replied. "You built a career on cruelty. We are not the same." Victoria walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back. "You'll die alone in that tiny apartment. All your money, all your power, it won't matter. You'll die alone." Eleanor smiled sadly. "I'd rather die alone with my principles than live surrounded by people I destroyed to get there." The door closed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Amanda Clark, the CFO, let out a breath. "Christ, Ellie." Eleanor sat down heavily. "David, legal exposure?" "Minimal. Workplace observation during an active investigation is well within your rights. If anything, it strengthens our position." "She won't sue," Eleanor said. "She's too smart. She knows we have everything we need." After they all left, Eleanor sat alone in the boardroom, staring at the city below. She'd just ended her son's marriage, possibly destroyed any chance of seeing her grandson again. But she'd protected Martha, and Grace, and Samuel, and Rita, and every other employee who'd ever been made to feel worthless by someone who confused power with permission to be cruel. Her phone buzzed. A text message she'd sent Brandon 2 hours ago, still unanswered. "We need to talk. Tonight. My apartment. It's important." She stared at it, knowing that tonight's conversation would either repair their relationship or shatter it completely. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and returned to work. There was still a company to run. At 6:47 that evening, Eleanor's phone rang. Brandon's name on the screen. She picked up. "Hello, sweetheart." "Don't." His voice was raw. "Don't sweetheart me. What the hell did you do?" "I protected my company from a liability." "That's bullshit!" He never swore at her. Never. "This is about the party. You punished her because she embarrassed you." "I held her accountable because she systematically harassed older employees for 18 months. "That's an excuse, and you know it." Eleanor set down her teacup with careful precision. "Did Victoria tell you what she called me at Oliver's party?" Silence. "Did she tell you she called me a pauper? That she told security to remove this poor woman from the table?" She was stressed. She was cruel, Brandon, just like she was cruel to Grace Patterson, to Samuel Wright, to Rita Gonzalez, to Martha Cooper. Eleanor's voice remained steady. "Did she tell you what she said about Martha?" "Who's Martha?" "A woman who's worked at my company for 18 years, who raised 3 children on a dishwasher's salary, who Victoria told had given up on life because she washes dishes." A long pause. "That's not... She wouldn't... I was there, Brandon. I heard it myself." "What do you mean you were there?" Eleanor took a breath. "I worked undercover in the cafeteria last week, as a maintenance worker. I observed Victoria for 3 days." "You spied on my wife?" "I investigated an employee with multiple harassment complaints." "She's not just an employee, she's family." "Then perhaps you should have taught her how family treats people." Eleanor's control cracked. "Perhaps you should have said something when she threw your mother out of your house. Perhaps you should have defended me instead of sitting there like you were ashamed of me." The silence that followed felt eternal. When Brandon spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "You think I'm a coward. I think you've spent 3 years prioritizing your wife's cruelty over your own conscience. She's the mother of my child. And I'm your mother." But apparently that stopped mattering 3 years ago. She heard something break in the background. Glass, maybe. "I need time," Brandon said finally. I can't talk to you right now." "Brandon," the line went dead. Eleanor stood in her kitchen, phone in hand, feeling the weight of what she'd just lost. Tuesday evening, 7:23. Eleanor was returning from a walk when she saw them in her building's lobby. Brandon and Victoria. Brandon looked terrible. Unshaven, red-eyed, wearing yesterday's clothes. Victoria looked worse. Unwashed hair, face splotchy from crying, hands still bandaged. "We need to talk," Brandon said. His voice was flat. "Upstairs. Now." The elevator ride was silent. Inside Eleanor's apartment, Victoria spoke first. "Eleanor, I came to apologize." Eleanor set her keys down carefully. "Did you?" "I was wrong. About the party. About many things. Victoria's voice trembled. I was stressed and I took it out on you. It was inexcusable. Eleanor turned slowly. Victoria looked genuinely distraught. Continue. I said terrible things. To you, about you. I let my insecurities make me cruel. Victoria stepped closer. But losing my job, isn't that enough? Haven't I been punished enough? This isn't about punishment, Eleanor said quietly. It's about accountability. You made me wash dishes for a week. You humiliated me in front of the board. What more do you want? Eleanor walked to her laptop. She turned it toward them. On screen, Victoria's email to Brandon. The one about cutting Eleanor out of Oliver's life completely. Brandon's face went white. Mom, how did you... Company server. All executive communications are archived. Eleanor's voice was cold. Victoria, would you like to read it aloud? Or should I? Victoria's eyes went wild. That's private, Eleanor read. Your mother raised you to accept poverty and mediocrity, but I won't let Oliver grow up thinking this is acceptable. Brandon sank into a chair. Every time he sees her, he asks why Grandma lives in a small apartment. He's starting to question our lifestyle, wondering if success matters. Stop, Brandon whispered. Eleanor continued. Eleanor is a weight around our necks. She embarrasses us. She makes us look like we came from nothing. I said stop! Brandon's shout filled the small apartment. Eleanor closed the laptop. You wanted to know why I did what I did, Victoria? It wasn't about the party. It was about protecting my grandson from learning that a person's worth is measured by their bank account. Victoria's mask shattered. The desperate apology vanished. You want the truth? Her voice turned cold. Fine. You are an embarrassment. You live in this tiny place when you could afford a mansion. You dress like you shop at thrift stores when you run a billion-dollar company. You act like money doesn't matter when it's the only thing that matters. Vicky, Brandon tried to interrupt. No! I'm done pretending. Victoria whirled on him. Your mother is a joke, Brandon. She could be somebody, be important, but instead she plays at being humble and expects applause. Eleanor sat down slowly. Is that really what you think? You built an empire and you live like a monk. You have power and you waste it on cafeteria workers and old people who can't keep up, Victoria was shouting now. You could have helped us, but instead you threw it away on strangers who don't matter. Those strangers built my company. You built your company. They just showed up for paychecks. Silence. Brandon stood slowly. Vicky, stop talking. Why? Because you can't handle the truth about your precious mother. Because if you say one more word, I'm going to say things I can't take back. His voice was eerily calm. Please, stop. Victoria stared at him. You're choosing her. You haven't built anything, Brandon said quietly. You've climbed. There's a difference. He turned to Eleanor. Mom, I need to tell you something. I should have told you 3 months ago. Brandon, don't... Victoria's voice was panicked. 3 months ago, Victoria asked me to cut you out of our lives. Completely. Eleanor felt the floor tilt. What? She said Oliver was getting confused, that seeing you in your small apartment was making him question our values. She wanted me to tell you that your visits needed to stop. Victoria grabbed his arm. You're taking it out of context. Brandon shook her off. She wrote me a proposal. Phasing out Eleanor, a strategic approach. She had timelines, talking points for explaining it to Oliver, excuses for why Grandma couldn't come to holidays anymore. Eleanor couldn't breathe. I said no. I told her I would never cut my mother out of my son's life. Brandon's voice broke. That's why she was so angry at the party. Because I'd refused her. Again. Oliver was asking questions. Victoria was crying now. He wanted to know why Grandma didn't have nice things. He was learning the wrong lessons. The wrong lessons? Eleanor's voice was barely audible. What lessons, Victoria? That money doesn't matter. That success doesn't matter. That you can build an empire and still live like what? Like you're poor, Victoria screamed. You're a billionaire who lives like you're poor, and it's confusing my son. Brandon walked to the door, opened it. Get out. Brandon, get out of my mother's home. Get out of my life. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more. His eyes were dead. You tried to take my mother from my son. You humiliated her in our home. You built your career destroying people you thought were beneath you. And even now, caught and exposed, you can't admit you were wrong. I'm fighting for our family. No, you're fighting to protect your ego. Brandon's voice was final. We're done. My lawyer will contact you about custody. Victoria looked between them. This is what you wanted, she hissed at Eleanor. Congratulations. You win. I didn't want this, Eleanor said quietly. I wanted you to learn that kindness matters, that people matter, that success without decency is nothing. Keep your decency. Victoria grabbed her purse. I hope you're happy, alone in your tiny apartment with your noble principles, because that's all you'll have. She slammed the door. Brandon stood at the door for a long moment. Then he sank to the floor, back against the wall, and put his head in his hands. Eleanor moved carefully and sat beside him on the floor of her small entryway. They sat in silence. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Finally, I'm sorry, Mom. You have nothing to be sorry for. I should have defended you. At the party. For 3 years, I should have seen what she was doing. You loved her. Love makes us blind. I let her call you poor, embarrassing, trash. His voice cracked. I let her treat you like you were nothing. Eleanor took his hand. You found your way back. That's what matters. Oliver's going to ask why Mommy doesn't live with us anymore. We'll tell him the truth, in a way he can understand. Brandon looked at her. What is the truth? That sometimes people make choices that hurt others, and when they can't stop making those choices, families have to change. Eleanor squeezed his hand. But love doesn't go away. It just finds new forms. They sat on the floor Victoria had mocked, in the apartment she'd derided, and Brandon cried for everything he'd lost and almost lost. Eleanor held her son and thought about the cost of integrity. It was high, but some things couldn't be purchased at any price. 6 months later, April 2025, the quarterly report on Eleanor's desk showed numbers that told a story. Revenue up 23%. Employee retention up 45%. Age discrimination complaints down 97%. But numbers didn't tell the whole story. In January, Eleanor had promoted Rita Gonzalez to Director of Hospitality Services, overseeing all cafeteria operations across 3 locations. Martha Cooper had been offered early retirement with full benefits. She'd declined. I like feeding people, she'd said simply. Eleanor gave her a raise instead. Samuel Wright was now VP of Operations, his decades of practical experience finally recognized. Grace Patterson had returned to day shift as Senior Financial Advisor, training younger employees in the foundational wisdom she'd accumulated over 25 years. The Second Act Scholarship had launched in February, full tuition for children or grandchildren of TechVision employees over 50 who'd worked at the company for at least 10 years. Rita's grandson was the first recipient, starting at State University in the fall. And every Saturday morning, Eleanor saw Brandon and Oliver. Brandon had sold the McMansion. Too many memories. He'd bought a modest house 15 minutes from Eleanor's apartment. 3 bedrooms, a yard for Oliver, close enough for Sunday dinners. The divorce had finalized in March. Victoria had moved to Los Angeles, taking a position at a smaller firm. She had Oliver 1 week each month. She's different, Brandon had said last week. In therapy, working on herself. Oliver says she's quieter. Eleanor hoped for Oliver's sake that it was true. Sunday afternoon, Riverside Park. The old picnic blanket spread under an oak tree. Oliver, now 7 years old, raced around the playground, his laughter echoing across the grass. Brandon looked healthier. The constant tension that had lined his face during his marriage was gone. Dr. Peterson says I'm making progress, Brandon said, watching his son. Learning to set boundaries, to recognize enabling behaviors. How does that feel? Terrifying, liberating. He smiled. Both. Oliver ran over, breathless. Grandma, did you see? I made it across the monkey bars. I saw you're getting so strong. Oliver collapsed onto the blanket, grabbing a juice box. Grandma, can you tell me the story? Which story? The one about how you built your castle. Eleanor glanced at Brandon, who nodded. Well, Prince Oliver, it started in a very small castle. So small it was really just a garage. A garage? Oliver's eyes went wide. Like where we park cars? Exactly. I had a desk made from an old door, a chair I'd found on the sidewalk, and a computer held together with duct tape. That's silly. It was, but I had something more important than fancy furniture. What? An idea, and the courage to try, even when people said I'd fail. Oliver snuggled closer. Did people really say you'd fail? Many people. They said I was too old, didn't have enough money, that women couldn't run tech businesses. Eleanor smiled. They were wrong. Because you're the best, Oliver declared with absolute childhood certainty. Brandon pulled out his phone. Mom, picture time. I want to remember this. They posed together. Eleanor, Brandon, Oliver. 3 generations under an oak tree. Brandon set the timer and jumped into frame just as the camera clicked. The moment captured. Oliver's gap-toothed grin, Brandon's genuine smile, Eleanor's hand on her grandson's shoulder. A family. Changed, but not broken. After Oliver fell asleep on the blanket, Brandon spoke quietly. Mom, Victoria sent a letter yesterday. Eleanor tensed. And? She wants to apologize. To you. She's been in therapy for 4 months. Says she's realizing things about herself. How do you feel about that? I don't know. Part of me wants to believe she's changing. Part of me remembers everything. He looked at sleeping Oliver. But she's his mother. If there's a chance... What did you tell her? That if she wants to make amends, she should write you. No expectations, just honesty. Eleanor nodded slowly. We'll see. Because some wounds needed time. Some lessons took years. And some people, maybe, deserved a chance at redemption. But that was for another day. October 2025, Tech Vision Annual Shareholder Meeting. The auditorium was packed. 500 people filled the seats as Eleanor stood at the podium. Good morning. This year I want to talk about a different kind of growth. The screen behind her displayed the statistics, but Eleanor spoke about something deeper. Last year we faced a crisis of culture. We discovered that performance and cruelty had been confused, that revenue had been prioritized over respect. She paused, looking at Rita, Martha, Samuel, and Grace in the third row. We made changes, but the most important change was remembering that companies aren't built by CEOs in corner offices. They're built by every person who shows up, does their job with dignity, and contributes to something larger than themselves. Photos appeared on screen. The cafeteria staff, the facilities teams, the accounting department. These are the people who built Tech Vision, not because they wrote code or closed deals, though many did that too, but because they understood something essential. Excellence without kindness is just ambition. Success without respect is just numbers. Standing ovation. Rita was crying. Martha beamed. Samuel stood at attention, pride on his weathered face. In the back, Brandon sat with Oliver, the boy in a jacket slightly too big, trying to look grown up. Is Grandma famous? Oliver whispered. Kind of, Brandon whispered back. Is she a superhero? Brandon smiled. Yeah, buddy, she kind of is. That evening, Eleanor's doorbell rang. Brandon and Oliver stood there with a grease-stained bag. Surprise, Grandma, we brought your favorite. Chinese takeout from the place on 42nd Street. They ate on the floor like old times. Oliver trying chopsticks, dropping rice everywhere. Grandma, kids at school asked if you're really a CEO. I am. Does that seem weird? No, it seems cool. Oliver successfully grabbed a piece of chicken. You're like Iron Man, but a grandma. Eleanor laughed until she nearly choked. I'll take that. After dinner, Brandon set up his camera. Picture time, for real. Everybody say Empire, Oliver shouted. Empire! Flash. The photo captured them perfectly. Oliver with rice on his cheek, Brandon's arm around his mother, Eleanor smiling with genuine joy. After Oliver fell asleep on the couch, Brandon pulled out his phone. Victoria's letter. I think you should read it. The email was short. Eleanor, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm writing because I need to take accountability. You were right about me. I was cruel. I built my career tearing down people I thought were beneath me. I treated you terribly because I was threatened by your strength and ashamed of my own insecurity. I told myself I was protecting Oliver. The truth is, I was protecting my ego from values I didn't understand. 6 months of therapy taught me that the person I was most afraid of becoming was you. Because you had everything: success, power, respect, without needing to flaunt it. That terrified me. I'm not asking forgiveness. I'm telling you that you taught me real power isn't about making others feel small. It's about lifting them up. I hope Oliver understands what an extraordinary grandmother he has. I'm sorry for everything. Victoria Eleanor read it twice, set down the phone. What do you think? Brandon asked. I think she's starting to understand. Whether that becomes real change, Eleanor shrugged. That's her journey. Do you forgive her? Eleanor thought about Grace's tears, Samuel's humiliation, Martha's dignity. I don't know yet. Forgiveness isn't a switch. She looked at sleeping Oliver. But for his sake, I hope she really does change. Later, alone at her desk, Eleanor wrote back, Victoria, thank you for your honesty. Forgiveness is a process, not an event. I can't tell you I've forgiven you yet, but I appreciate your accountability. Oliver deserves to see his mother become someone kind. If you continue this work, perhaps one day we can discuss reconciliation. Until then, I wish you well. Eleanor. She sealed it, set it aside to mail tomorrow. Some bridges took time to rebuild. Some never could be. But grace meant leaving the door open, even just a crack. That night, Eleanor stood at her window overlooking the city. Lights twinkled in windows, each one a life, a story, invisible struggles and triumphs. She thought about Victoria's question. Why live in this tiny apartment? Eleanor looked around. The worn couch where 3 generations had sat tonight. The kitchen where she'd taught Brandon to cook, now teaching Oliver. The desk where she'd built an empire while her son slept nearby. This apartment held more wealth than any mansion. Not wealth of square footage, wealth of memories, of moments, of love that survived tests and emerged stronger. Victoria had been right about one thing. Eleanor could have used her position differently, could have displayed her success, made everyone understand her power. Instead, she'd used it to protect people, to lift them up, to teach her grandson that worth wasn't measured in square feet or designer labels. You'll die alone in that tiny apartment, Victoria had said. Eleanor smiled. She wouldn't die alone. She'd die surrounded by people who knew her not as a CEO, but as someone who'd fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves, who'd chosen kindness when cruelty would have been easier. That was the legacy worth building. Her phone buzzed. A text from Oliver, Brandon helping him spell. Grandma, I forgot to tell you, I love you infinity times infinity. Also, can we have pancakes next Sunday? Dad says you make the best. Good night, Oliver. Eleanor typed back. Infinity +1. Pancakes are a deal. Sweet dreams, Prince Oliver. She returned to the window, looking at the city below. Tomorrow, she'd return to Tech Vision and continue building a culture where respect mattered more than revenue, where age was valued, not dismissed, where everyone, from CEO to dishwasher, understood they were part of something larger than themselves. But tonight she was just grandma, just a woman in a small apartment who'd figured out that the most valuable things couldn't be purchased. Success without kindness was hollow. Power without compassion was meaningless. And love, real, unconditional love, was the only empire worth building. Eleanor Hayes had built both. A billion-dollar company and a family that would remember not her net worth, but her worth as a human being. That was legacy. That was victory. That was enough. The lights of the city twinkled like stars. And in a small apartment on the 8th floor, a woman who'd conquered boardrooms and demolished discrimination smiled. She'd spent her life building castles, but the one that mattered most fit perfectly in a tiny one-bedroom apartment where love lived in every corner and pancakes would be served next Sunday. That was the empire that would last forever.